Hello and welcome back to our video tutorial series on how to use GreenScenario. In this episode, we're looking at the engine component, which is to be found here at the GreenScenario 2.0 ribbon. As mentioned before, this is the heart of GreenScenario. It takes in both our scenarios and data component as input. It does have two buttons. One is to reset everything in the drawing, and it does come in handy when things don't look as they should. And also when we, for example, want to change some materials in the drawing that we would have imported first from the template. If you want to change the appearance of the material, you would do it first by double clicking and then changing something about it, and then you would have to just reset everything, so essentially reload these materials again into GreenScenario. And there is also this export button that we would, once we're done with setting up multiple scenarios, we can hit the export button and export all the scenarios to an online dashboard and then send it to our clients as well. With for outputs, we have geometry and materials, and they're connected to our rendering component, custom preview. This is a built-in Grasshopper/Rhino component. And we have our graphics controls. So again, with texture scale, we can just scale the display of textures. And also with our line weight component or line weight slider, we'll be changing the graphical appearance of or how thick the lines representing individual levels in our buildings are. Modules selected, which one do we want to use for our KPIs? Do we only want to, for example, focus on water in economics? We can do that. We can turn them on and off individually. Green factor is part of the green section, and it does slow things down in a noticeable way. So sometimes it's recommended to turn it off and back on right before we want to export. And by the way, all these checkboxes, they will also have an effect on our export to the online dashboard. So if we only want to show two main categories, that's how we would do it, and then we would hit the export button and then generate our online dashboard. Also on the dashboard tab, we have the option to choose different languages. We can change the size of the dashboard, and we can control its opacity. But we can also we have the option to set a baseline scenario over here. What we would need to do for this to work is we would need to have at least two scenarios in the drawing. So let's just quickly create them. We'll connect the other one over here, and let's change the size, not the size, but the type of the material to gravel, and let's say this is our rain garden over here. Yeah. And so right now we're looking at the active scenario number 1, and we can set as long as baseline scenario here is set to 0, nothing changes. But then we can set it to 1 and say that our baseline scenario is scenario 1, and you can see these yellow markers, they appear at every single KPI over here, and they help us see how far we are from a selected scenario. So for example, if we were to say our baseline scenario should be scenario number 1, and then we change the active scenario to scenario number 2, the yellow markers represent how far the values are from scenario number 1. So for example, scenario number 1, its peak runoff coefficient was at 1, so it was maxed out. So scenario number 2 is bringing it way down to 0.33. And just to prove it here, active scenario number 1 and active scenario number 2. If you don't want to see these baseline comparisons, just bring the slider back to 0, and then they will all disappear. You can choose any scenario as a baseline scenario, and that here, so taking scenario number 1 as or baseline scenario number 2 as baseline, and looking at our active scenario number 1, we see how far we are from these values. And that's pretty much it about the dashboard, the engine component. Do remember about this reset functionality. So, the software is trying to help you. So when it breaks and you actually fix the geometry, it should reset itself. But there are instances of it, so where it doesn't, and it just leaves you, with this broken looking geometry. Right now, hitting reset will not do you any good because the geometry is still not connected. But right now, we hit reset, and then after we have fixed the error, and it starts calculating again.